This is truly a celebration. So thank you all for participating and being here for it. My name is Nia McAllister, and I'm the Senior Public Programs Manager at the Museum of the African Diaspora. And I would like to welcome you to our first ever African Literary Awards ceremony. As we begin, I invite you to again share in the chat where you're joining us from. At the start of all of our programs, we like to ground ourselves in the spaces that we're occupying. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, and/or descendants of those forcibly brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose lands we are located. MoAD occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, and we pay our respect to the Ohlone peoples and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We encourage everyone to learn more about the native lands that you occupy by visiting nativeland.ca. Today, we are excited to be celebrating the inaugural African Literary Award. This award recognizes an African author who's produced a work of literary excellence and has taken a leadership role in promoting writing and literacy in their local communities. MoAD has been in partnership with our wonderful host and co-founder of African Book Club, Faith Adiele, since fall of 2019. And we've taken this program, the African Book Club, virtual since 2020 and are very fortunate to have many of our authors that we read join us for our African Book Club. Earlier this year, we were presented with the opportunity to launch MoAD's first ever literary award. So working together with Faith and our Director of Public Programs, Elizabeth Gessel, the three of us developed what is now the African Literary Award. And we reviewed the titles that we've read from African Book Club since fall of 2019. For this award, we assessed the work of over 32 authors who've all been read by African Book Club. And while this was a very difficult decision, we are pleased to have selected a short list of 5 titles, which include 2 memoirs and 3 works of fiction. And from those 5, we've selected 1 inaugural recipient of the African Literary Award, who is here joining us today. And before I pass it off to Faith to introduce our esteemed guest, I do want to acknowledge generous funding for this inaugural award has been provided by MoAD member Cedric Brown, who is a supporter of arts in the diaspora. And here to say a few words is Cedric Brown. Welcome up.
Well, thank you so much, Nia. I am thrilled to participate in today's first MoAD African Literary Award conversation. And I really wanted to take this opportunity to publicly thank the MoAD team, Monetta, Faith, Elizabeth, yourself, Nia, alongside board member Eric McDonald, for your openness when we first chatted about this idea for an award last December, and for the team's work to shape this into a fully fledged award. I also would love to congratulate Mr. Rémy Ngamije. I've been raving about the eternal audience of one, and I look forward to hearing and reading and learning more from you. So again, and all around, many thanks to MoAD for this vital opportunity to bring us together across the diaspora community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cedric. This is so exciting to have your support to found this award and to continue it into the future. We're very excited. Thank you so much. I would now like to present a short highlight video, which will introduce our 5 shortlisted authors, and then I will be passing it off to Faith to introduce our guest. So here we have the 5 shortlisted authors for the African Literary Award.
I love writing because, you know, I follow those characters and I live their life truthfully. And some of the things that made me do were quite crazy, but I would go through it all over again. Because for me, the process of writing this book was really torturous. But at the end of the day, it's liberating as well. And that's why I always say, like, yes, I wrote the book, but actually the book rewrote me as well.
I was from a tubes off household. I was raised with just these lush stories, both culturally, religiously. So when it comes to how I go about writing, I think the only way that I can really answer that question is that that's how I understood and was introduced to story, right? And so it's how I navigated on the page. It's how I tell. It's how I speak. Is through story. Is through that legacy. That's my inheritance.
Feminism is all about context, right? We reach our politics through an understanding of where we sit in the big wide world. And this was a book that I very much wanted to write because I had things to say about the world. And the way into saying those things about the world was through my experience. To write a self-indulgent memoir about myself was not the purpose. The purpose was to write a larger set of reflections about the world and to use the fact that I had just been born in extraordinary times to a pretty extraordinary sort of set of circumstances as the way into that larger conversation.
Now, Doek is a magazine that we started in 2019, and all it really does, its mission is to unearth Namibian stories, bring them to the world, and then also alongside publish African and African diaspora voices alongside each other, so that you have this consciousness about who we are as a nation, but then also about who we are on the continent, but then also connecting to our consciousnesses elsewhere. I don't want this singular idea of what African literature is like.
I've been writing for 30 years now, working from a truncated imagination, right? Meaning that my imagination begins in the 1950s, 1960s, right? If you think about what's a literary tradition, I should be able to tap, even without wanting to, right? I should be able to tap into early South African writing because it's part of it, right? So what happens to my imagination when it's working from a false, okay, let me put it that way, from a false literary history?
What a stellar lineup that is. So congratulations to our 5 shortlisted authors, and congratulations to Rémy for being our inaugural recipient of the African Literary Award. And with that, I would like to pass it off to Faith and to both introduce Rémy and to briefly talk about our shortlisted authors. Welcome, Faith.
Thank you, Nia. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Cedric, so great to see you here. Thank you for making this wonderful opportunity for us. We're so appreciative. And for being open to the idea that we really wanted this award to not just reward literary excellence, but really the full citizen. That we were really impressed by how all 5 authors showed used their platforms to create literary opportunities for others. And that interplay, I think, that highlights the importance of story in community and nation building. So we were just really thrilled by all of them. Suleiman spent his early life in a refugee camp, and his beautiful book, Silence is a Mother Tongue, is a delicately, formally inventive novel that's set in a Sudanese refugee camp, exploring the impact of war on female and queer bodies and voices. And he created a creative writing academy for refugees and asylum seekers in Europe. And they also founded the Asmara Addis Literary Festival in exile, and continues to promote the importance of storytelling as survival. Wayatu Moore, who first came to us as a novelist, but this year we read her memoir. She's a Liberian author, and it's written with the same kind of magical realism that her debut novel was, and it documents her family's escape from Liberia after civil war breaks out and the journey to America. And since then, she's returned to Monrovia to start, to found a bookstore that also is a nonprofit doing advocacy and curriculum development and engaging craft through service. Sisonke Simang, her memoir is also about being in exile, and she was the daughter of South African political exiles. and documents her search for education identity across many nations, Zambia, Kenya, Canada, the US, and then returning to South Africa once it was free. And she works as the head story trainer in Perth at the Center for Stories, working with migrants and refugees. And then also does nonfiction writing, journalism, human rights work, and policy analysis for Perth Writers Week. Makoma wa Ngugi is a little bit of everything. He's a novelist, a poet, a literary scholar. The novel that we were looking at was his fourth, and it's set in an illegal Nairobi boxing hall and has four competing Ethiopian musicians interacting with each other. He's a board member of his father's foundation, Ngugi wa Thiong'o Foundation, co-founder of the Mabati Cornell Kiswahili Prize for African Literature. I think it's the only one that's in a native language, and has written a lot about the rise of the African novel. So, and he also played DJ when he came to be with us. So it was great competition you were up against, Rémy. And we're so thrilled that we had such great people to choose from. So Rémy is a Rwandan-born Namibian writer and photographer, founder, chairperson, administrator of Doek, an independent arts organization in Namibia supporting the literary arts. He's also editor-in-chief of Doek Literary Magazine, Namibia's first and only literary magazine, and founder of the Bank Windhoek Doek Literary Awards and the Literary Festival. In 2019, he was shortlisted for Best Original Fiction by Stack, and in 2020, shortlisted for the Kane Prize, which is always a barometer of great things to happen, and also the Afritondo Short Story Prize. His debut novel, The Eternal Audience of One, was first published in South Africa by Blackbird Books, and in 2021 became available worldwide through Scout Press from Simon & Schuster. In 2022, it was honored with a special mention at the Inaugural Grand Prix Pan-African de Literature. And as author and MoAD friend and former board member, Sarah Ladipo Manika wrote, Eternal Audience of One is a laugh-out-loud, funny writing that is sometimes so beautiful it dances off the page to a millennial beat in perfect tempo with its tales of migration, love, loss, and friendship. Another African Book Club friend, Maza Mengiste, author of The Shadow King, which was shortlisted for the 2020 Booker Prize, writes, at once a millennial caper and a loving homage to all that is lost in exile. The Eternal Audience of One is nothing short of brilliant. The humor in this stunning novel will keep you glued, but it is the wisdom, elegiac and mature, that will keep you mesmerized. Take note, world. Rémy Ngamije is that electrifying voice you've been waiting for. And finally, from fellow shortlister, Makoma himself, he said, no writing convention is safe in Rémy's hands. Not time, not form, not where a story begins or ends, because to tell the story of an idiosyncratic yet strangely coherent and cosmopolitan Africa, where anything can happen, he has to reshape writing itself. And he does so with love, beauty, and humor. Reader, please meet the future of African literature. I myself first met Rémy through Afrolit Sans Frontières Festival, which was a virtual literary festival that Zukisa Warner had started in response to the curfews and lockdowns in 2019 and 2020. And I started noticing this guy would come on to every event. He was always late and he was always causing trouble in the chat. He was hilarious. He was wicked. And I was like, oh, I got to do an event with this guy sometime. So then later when his book came out, I was like, yeah, I told Nia and Elizabeth, I was like, we got to lock down this guy because he's hilarious. And he did. He zoomed in. He charmed us with the signature wit and energy that distinguishes his writing. And when the committee was looking at his work, we were just like, not only is this guy a one-man literary initiative, but this novel just rockets us through eras and locations with this youthful zest, and it's this cultural mashup of Rwanda and Windhoek and Paris and Brussels and Nairobi and Cape Town. So if you are here, you are in for a treat. So welcome and congratulations, Rémy. And thanks for bringing your real bookcase to the party. So to get us started, can you just explain, give us the summary of the novel, maybe explain the title, and read us a short section that will give us a taste and make people who haven't bought it buy a whole bunch of copies?
Yeah, thank you so much, Faith, for that wonderful and generous introduction. I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much to Mr. Cedric Brown for making this award possible. It is, and the rest of the MoAD team as well. It's never easy to start a literary award, and to the administration that goes behind it is something that is unimaginable to the people who are either receiving it or participating in it. So thank you all for your generous and hard work. Really, I really do appreciate it. And lastly, Silence is My Mother Tongue by Suleiman Adonia is an amazing book, impeccably written with an amazing language. And I met Suleiman once, and I'm still to this day trying to get his skincare routine. He still hasn't given it to me. Sisonke Simang's memoir is something that I read during lockdown, and it really transcends, I think, what is possible with memory and reimagining it in the presence. And so her work is also impeccable. And I met her once, and her head wrap game is through the roof. So these are the two writers who I can outright say like are amazing. And Mukoma is the most amusing, most generous, most intelligent writer that I've had the pleasure of meeting. And you said he played for you, and did he play his tizita, his guitar?
No, he
Did
had
he
a
insist?
whole playlist. He was just DJing while like,
Yeah. Because we did that during lockdown. Like a bunch of writers just used to keep each other company in the evenings, a couple of days a week. And he was obsessed with Kenny Rogers. And so I was like, if that's the competition, you can bring it on. But he was just playing Kenny Rogers the whole time. But to get onto The Eternal Audience of One, it's a story it focuses on one main character called Seraphim, who is a young man from Rwanda who's living in Namibia, and he's on the cusp of graduating from his final year in law school. And obviously the big wider world is beckoning, and he's so uncertain about what the future holds, not only about where it holds, but also to a large extent about where he comes from, because he's been forced into migration by the situation in his home country of Rwanda. So he's been moving around for his whole life, and Namibia is the place where he's settled in. And through the exploration of the novel, we dive back into not only how his family wound up there, but about the different set of circumstances that shaped not only him, but also his parents, and then the larger political background that fueled the Rwandan disasters in 1994. But it also explores like his journey through childhood all the way to teenagehood until this present moment. So it's not only a migration of place, it's also a migration of time, a migration through different egos, a migration through different aspects of his imagination. And The Eternal Audience of One is posed as a question predominantly by the character, in which it asks, if, as Shakespeare said, if all the world is a stage, upon which we all perform, who is the audience and who is watching us when we go through these things, through our emotions, through our daily lives, through our traumas, through our loves, through our losses? It's a question that I struggled to answer, that I was curious about, and that from the starting of the story, if I was the audience, for example, where would this story begin and where it end? To this day, I still have no finite answer. Yeah. And you mentioned a short reading.
Yes.
Can I read something from the prologue, which is always my favorite part to start in? So I'll read a short excerpt. And it comes from the prologue. A long forgotten essay, The Last Ticket Out of Town by Seraphim Turihamwe. Windhoek has 3 temperatures: hot, mosquito, and fucking cold. The city is allowed 2 or 3 days of mild spring weather in early September before the unrelenting heat crowds them out until May. The summers are long and sweaty, so much so that job offers can be sweetened by the promise of air conditioning and an overseeing committee to adjudicate on room temperature disputes because white people do not know how to share. Summer nights are stifling. Cooling breezes hit their curfews and leave the night air still and warm from the day's lingering heat. The departing sun brings out the mosquitoes. They are organized. They are driven. If they could be employed, they will be the city's most reliable workforce. Alas, people do not have my vision. From sunset to sunrise, they make enjoying a quiet evening drink on a balcony a buzzing and bloody affair. June, July, and August are bitter and cold. An ill wind clears out the gyms. Running noses are the only exercise anyone gets in the winter. The city is called a city because the country needs one, but really city is a big word for such a small place. But it will probably be offensive to have a capital town or a capital village, so someone called it a city. The title stuck. Life is not hard in Windhoek, but it is not easy either. The poor are either falling behind or falling pregnant. The rich refuse to send the elevator back down when they reach the top. And since cities require a sturdy foundation of tolerated inequalities, Windhoek is like many other big places in the world. It is a haven for more, but a place of less. If you're not politically connected or from old white money, then the best thing to be is a tourist. The city and the country fawn over tourists. The country's economy does too. That is when it is not digging itself poor. That is Windhoek. The best thing to do in the city is arrive and leave.
Ay, ay, ay.
Yeah.
So are people thrilled with your novel?
Let me tell you what. I'd worked on this novel all the way through 2016 and 17, and the first time I ever did a public reading, it was maybe somewhere in 2018. It was an event hosted by the U.S. Embassy here in Windhoek, and my friend Peter Orner had invited me, and he said, "Look, it will be just nice to read something from your work because I've seen it and I think people would enjoy it." So I read from the prologue because it was the shortest part that I could read. And man, they were like, the former mayor of Windhoek was in the audience and she was not impressed with me. She was not impressed. She was just like, I remember she came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Are you the young man who read the thing about Windhoek?" And I said, yes, yeah, it's me. My name's Rémy. And then she said, "I just like to make one correction." And she was really, really feisty. And she said, Windhoek is not that small. And I was just like, out of everything I said, that's what got to you?
That's it?
That's it. And there were a lot of people who were touched by it because it was coming at the time, it was coming from a non-Namibian voice. I only became Namibian later on. So before that, I had the voice of an outsider. And wherever you go in the world, outsiders are not allowed to have particular opinions. They're not allowed to have particular standpoints. Your job as an outsider is to fit in, to blend in, and to be thankful for whatever position you're given. And so when this excerpt was first read at the beginning, it wasn't as a native. But now that I am Namibian, now that I embrace the heritage, the history, and that I'm imbued in the fabric of society, people appreciate the humor more, and they appreciate the realism that's in it, but also the hope, because towards the end of it, it's not all negative. There's the negatives are the reality, but the aspiration and the hope aspects are incredibly positive. I mean, this place could be something else with just a little more effort and just a little more work, with a little more foresight and political will. And so now the reception to it is drastically different. But I can tell you from the beginning, it was not. And I was scared about including it from the beginning as the prologue. I was like, wow, this thing is going to divide people immediately. But in the end, there was no other way for me to start it. And it anchored it and it gave me a point of starting. Yeah.
Yeah. Point of starting. That's great. That's wonderful. And that's fascinating when you talk about your job as an outsider, what you can bring to a place, and then you're expected to bring to a place. So that's really interesting. I mean, and I love how the book does really deal with you investigate home in its many forms. Is it someplace you're born or that you migrate or immigrate to, where you fit, where you can, find your literary voice, and then kind of how we also keep where we came from enshrined, almost like some sort of thing in amber. Much of the literature we get that comes out of Africa has to have some sort of out migration to the West to make us care about it. And so I love the fact that, I mean, you have that, but you also have a lot of internal migration. Those themes are really global. So I was just wondering if your own interest in home is informing this. Was this an attempt to kind of work that out or kind of nuance the way we were talking about home in Africa?
I couldn't write a story about someone moving from Africa to the West or to Northern Europe or to Australia or Latin America or Southeast Asia because I don't have those experiences myself. So my imagination has some geographic limitations. I can't imagine what Manhattan is like. I've only seen it in pictures, in movies, heard about it in songs. My imagination can't render it in a three-dimensional, believable way. And so it was a big fear of mine at the time of writing that my people move from one African country to the next. I was like, will anyone be interested in this? And I'm not sure if you remember, but I was writing in about a time when the door for immigrant literature had been, African immigrant literature had been blown wide open by Chimamanda's Americana. And Imbolo Mbue was just killing it. And all of these stories were out there, which was encouraging for a lot of us who are dealing with migration, but also scary because some of our people didn't move to the US or to Canada or to London or wherever it is. Some of our people moved from Nigeria to Ghana, or in my case, from Rwanda to Kenya and then to Namibia. So there was a big doubt about whether our stories would find a home or whether they find a place. For me, it wasn't a deliberate attempt to write about internal migration. It was a limitation that I might have had as a reader. But now, many years on, I'm glad that I didn't try to fake a narrative that I was not privy to or that I could not really render as best as I could. And so now, much later, I'm glad that my characters focus on life on the continent. And a lot of people have come up to me since and said, it's wonderful to see that your characters, although they studied in the West at some point in their historic lives, they don't move to places that people don't know. And to be honest, after I did the research afterwards, I found out a lot of continental migration is intracontinental. It's not everyone can afford to board a flight and go to New York. You know, no one can afford to go to London or Paris or wherever the heck it is. So a lot of people, when their countries are under tension or when they're looking for better opportunities, most people just go one or two countries over because the cultures are sometimes similar. The languages, due to colonial histories, are sometimes similar. So you move to another English-speaking African country. If you're from Francophone Africa, you move to a French-speaking country. And I think that's how a lot of migration works on the continent, but it's not reflected in the literature necessarily. And that for me was a scary thing, knowing that there was this wave that was happening in the world for African immigrant literature, but it didn't necessarily focus on what I was writing. And only now, many years later, am I thankful that I had the courage. At the time, it was ignorance. Like I didn't know any better. But now I'll call it courage. Now I'll call it courage. Now it's courage. Now I'm glad that I stuck to what I knew and what was, I guess, a limitation. Now it's become a gift in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. I love that. By bucking the trend, you've really created a new trend, which is so important to hear this, to hear this intra continent travel, which is really fantastic. I love that you mentioned that you were afraid of a lot of these things. And I was just wondering how you kind of came up with, like, I teach a lot and people are always like, how do I, recapture my authentic voice? There's a way in which we think we need to write, particularly to be taken seriously. And so I love that this is just, the first time I saw you on chat, and then I talked, and then I read you on the page, and then you're authentically you all the time. And I'm just like wondering, like, how did you do that? Or did you just not know how not to be authentically you?
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance this humor with, like, we've got xenophobia and immigration and war, but it's all just like, it's such a great balance of being able to touch on these realities without sitting in a trauma narrative. It's got this beautiful propulsion humor.
I'll speak about me being a troll in the Afro Sans Frontiers chat room. So the backstory about all of that is, I think when you come from a country without an established literary tradition, there are no rules, there are no milestones, there's no way of being, there's nobody that says you must drink your tea with the pinky out, sir, and you must read this. There's none of that. So those rules fall away. So as a writer, you're given a little bit of a freedom to just express yourself in any way that's possible. And then I think as well, when there's the absence of a tradition, not only are you creating with every little thing that you do, but you create something that someone else is encouraged to break away from. So I have the luxury of not being a 21st century New Yorker writer, because that comes with its own tradition. You have to sound a particular way, you have to write a particular thing. Or if you're Nigerian, you have to I don't know, write about the Harmattan wind every couple of pages.
It's very windy.
It's very windy. It's very windy. You know,
Struggle
like
is real. You don't understand.
is it a Nigerian novel if there was no Harmattan wind? You know, it's a question. But there are none of those things. So because I was walking in this area, you know, I would come back to that ignorance thing. Like I didn't know any better, so I could just rely on who I was at the time. But trolling all the other writers in the Afro-Lit Sans Frontières, man, that was just comedic. It was good fun. It also, I won't lie to you, broke down a lot of barriers about what people thought, who people thought writers were. We all think that you're a name on a cover and that you're professor of this and director of that. But we wound up in that festival, just writers talking about things that they were intensely interested in during lockdown. People were interested in Suleiman's skincare routine. And we spent like a good 10 minutes just talking about it. We were interested in what people were watching, what kept them sane. You know, do they enjoy sport? Do they enjoy this kind of movies? And that really for me was like, oh, writers are they're just people like me and they make jokes and they ask awkward questions and they're also afraid of awkward questions. And, you know, I always say like, I wasn't the biggest troll in that thing. Maza was ungovernable. Maza and Kiswa were ungovernable. They were beyond. And, you know, this is Maza Mengistu, who's like shortlisted for the Booker Prize, but she doesn't take herself so seriously. That for me was like intensely liberating. It's like, oh no, you can afford to be a person. And that for me was, I think, interesting because up until that point, I'd never met a lot of writers and they were just names on pages for me. With regards to the writing of the novel, man, there's like a lot of dark things that happen in this book, with not only with trauma, but the things that people go through, the things that families go through, friendship circles go through. A lot of it is dark, but that's not all life is. There's a lot of dark things we go through in our day, but there's always a little positivity that happens. The way to write about that for me is to know that, yes, this character is about to experience some sort of trauma or some sort of hardship, but it's very hard to sell hardship as a narrative. You need some vehicle to cut through it. For me, humor has always been this malleable thing that you can draw people into circumstances that you would not otherwise have been in. And the best example I can use this is a date between two people. I mean, you never know how that date is going to end or how that relationship is going to end. But at the very beginning, when people are happy and they're cracking jokes and you're vibing, it's just vibes. You don't know where that thing is going to draw you. And I think it is the same thing for my writing. I know at the very end on page 10, something's weird is going to happen that they really be like, oh, snap. But how am I going to get them to page 10? Humor for me has always been like a very good, malleable vehicle. It gets people's guard down. It makes you feel, perhaps feel approachable. And then boom, on page 10, you're like, oh my goodness. And then again, I think it's a reflection of life. And I'm always reminded about that famous picture of the theater duality, the happy mask and the sad mask. Yeah, that for me is like life for me has always happened that way. If you just push one thing a little bit over, it becomes dramatic. And if you just pull it back a little, it becomes comedic. And I think that is what a lot of life is like. But then also with regards to the writing, you know, this is the first time you've asked it, Faith. I've never been asked this question, but I can't just write dark material all the time because it's like I still have to face the page tomorrow. You know, if I write page 10, I still have to wake up and face page 11. And I need something to get me to page 9. So it just can't all be dark. And for me, humor, based on all the writers that I enjoy reading, that have gotten through their works, humor has always been one. And then just have a fantastical imagination, the freedom to take a risk and do something different. Again, I call it artistic creativity now, but I didn't know any better. I didn't know any better. I just to for all the writers who are perhaps working on their first work, whatever it might be, you will never understand the power of just not knowing until the very end. So just steer with your gut instinct and see where it is that it leads you. In the very end, you can always claim in a panel like this with the wonderful Faith that, oh no, that was totally intentional. I planned page 235 3 years ago.
Exactly. We have to leave something for the critics to come up with. So,
Yeah.
So we're like, thank you. Well, one of the things that I particularly love as a writer in this is that even though it's a coming of age story that's, got all this interesting history to it, there's also this subtext about storytelling, which you announce from the very beginning, with this nobody ever makes it to the start of the story, not even the people in it. The most one can do is make some sort of start and then work towards some sort of ending. And so I love the idea of you're kind of also saying what the book can do, that literature can help us understand and make sense of these kind of fractured moments, these conflicts, this how do we make sense of the complexity of life and also in personal and national history. And I think that African arts in particular has this kind of value. I mean, at least I know in my own ethnic group, it's like the purpose of art is to make you more human. So I was just wondering if you could talk about having that subtext of storytelling and what you think is the role of literature in helping us be in the world.
Yeah. So this is something that I think I realized at the very beginning of the writing. My personal family history with us being migrants, with us having moved from our home country. Anybody who leaves their home has no inheritance other than the stories of their culture. There's no land, there's no bank accounts, there's nothing to pass on to your kids. Oftentimes, especially if it's under tension or trauma, all you can pass on is stories. So stories are a particular kind of heritage. Now, I don't think I was called upon to be the storyteller in my family. My siblings can also write. I'm just the one who's been doing it the longest. And when it came down to writing this particular story, writing Seraphine's story, I couldn't start it as once upon a time or in the beginning because I couldn't trace where the beginnings of his story were. Was it with his parents? Was it with 1994 Rwanda or pre-1994 Rwanda? Was it with the present moment and how all of those things link to each other? And I couldn't for the life of me figure out where the start of this thing was. And so that first chapter, that first line it might sound deeply profound, but it was, for me, an acknowledgement like, dear reader, I don't know where to start this, but I'll just begin here and hopefully we can go together on this journey. So a lot of it is also an acknowledgement of my limitations as a writer. But when I imagined these characters, and they were with me for a very, very long time, all the way since university, I had like notes and sketches and things that would happen, but I never knew how the hell to link all of them. And so when I finally committed to writing, I had the outline, but I was like, sure, which one is the start? And I remember when I was writing each chapter, and I did this interesting thing, I moved some chapters around, and any one of them could have been, at least in the first part of the novel, could have been the start. And so it's a question that I also pose to the reader, like, where does your story start? Does it start with today, yesterday, with your parents, with an event that happened 20, 30 years ago? Because after all, history isn't even history, it's still present. So when you say in a kingdom far, far away, it's like, how far away is this kingdom? And once upon a time, it's like, which time? Which ones? Yeah, which ones? Because once upon a time is so vague. I mean, it's something that we're all used to. Once upon a time in a kingdom far, far away. But you're like, which time? Because it's just so vague. It's just there. And which kingdom? How far away? Those kinds of questions, as soon as you start interrogating them, you're like, this story gets a little more complicated. And those for me were, as a novice writer, and this is something that I think I have to say, as a novice writer, I did not have the skill or the craft to navigate those questions. So all I could do was just acknowledge that weakness and carry on. And like, nobody makes it the start of a story, because when Seraphine came to me and when I was drafting his story, his family story, for the life of me, didn't know where to start. So I was just like, look, let's make this part one and then we'll wend our way through it, which is why, for example, it also jumps between different times, because when I was crafting it, it felt like this is a good time to explore this. It was also a way of helping myself through the writing of the novel, because Faith, I'm not Mukoma, I'm not Sisonke, I'm not Wayeto, and I'm not Suleiman. These are writers who are like either at the peak or approaching the peak of their crafting powers. And I can acknowledge, like, I was nowhere near there. I was just steering in the blind in the dark and hoping for the best. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's great. That's lovely. I have one final question before I open it up
Yeah.
to the audience.
Yeah.
You have these wonderful kind of weather reports that appear throughout the book. I mean, we got the three seasons in Windhoek, and then we have like, weather report for Cape Town, mild racism with
Yeah.
scattered xenophobic showers, which I love. And I just
Yeah.
I want the weather report on literary culture and activity in Namibia. What's going on and what's the connection between
Oh
your such subject and your
man.
writing?
Oh man, can I give it to you from like 2019? The weather report has been crazy. It's been since since the literary magazine started, it's been absolutely wild. Like Namibian writers have a portal where they can submit work and be considered. It's competitive. So there's like people who are really trying to craft the best story that they can. Since 2019, it's just been upward trajectory. More writers, more writers, more writers, more poets, more visual artists. And then since we incorporated the arts organization, the support we have had from the local community with a lot of the initiatives we've had has been amazing. We've had literary awards for the first time. People were hesitant about it from the beginning, but as soon as they figured out, oh, this is what it is, they were like, we must participate next year. Because everything's still so new here. It's not like the US where there's like the Pulitzer and then there's the Pushcart and then there's MacArthur Genius Grant, whatever. Everything's so new here. And then this year was big. We had our first literary festival. That was amazing. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, Windhoek was a capital city for, I think, the first time, because there were artists meeting together and talking about art and talking about books and talking about crafting. I was like, that's what city life should be with, like people just sharing amazing ideas together. We were incredibly supported by the University of East Anglia's International Chair of Creative Writing. We had Titi Dangarengba here, we had Zukiswa Warner, we had Jean McNeil, we had Femi Coyote, and this amazing group of 8 writers, young writers from Namibia, who were not only participating in the panels, but asking questions, but also actively steering the festival. It was the most amazing 3 days in Namibia, and it made me, it totally wiped out all of some of the hard day-to-day livings that we do out here, and it was just amazing. But more than that, not only did we have one festival, we had another one in September, like another one. I was like, guys, this is amazing. Like, can we do this? I was like, yo, this is wild. This was so cool. Another organization wound up partnering with us. With Doek, we co-hosted another festival, and that was again incredible to see. The energy was different, the focus was different, but again, this meeting of literary enthusiasts, people who are interested in stories, who are interested in narratives, who are interested in writers, in artists. They just came together for, again, 3 separate nights. People put time in their schedules to just come and talk and discuss and be around each other. That for me is amazing to see. And more than that, we're also publishing its first collection of short stories featuring stories from Namibia, Zambia, Eswatini, South Africa, and there's one country I'm missing: Eswatini, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. I mean, this is stuff that 3 years ago in 2019, when we launched the magazine, you said this is gonna happen. It'd be like, nah, I wouldn't have envisioned it, but it's happening. And for us, where everything is still so fresh and so new, it's an amazing time to be a writer, because it just feels there's that possibility that my story might find a home, which didn't exist when I was writing. For me, the avenue to get to writing was like, I have to get into South Africa somehow, some way. But now it just feels like there's a little bit of a platform, and that is amazing.
That is amazing.
Like, the weather forecast is a lot of work, man. Faith, it's not easy being a person in literature. It's a lot of work. Some of it sometimes feels unrewarded until you get a random email from someone in Tahiti and says, yo, I read the story and it was cool. And you're like, what are people in Tahiti doing? I mean, like, that's so unexpected. You're like, people in Tahiti are just clicking onto this random. I'm like, you wind up having, how did you hear about it? Where did you hear? What did you read? What did you think of? And it's like, no, the story from the northern part of Namibia resonated with me on the island. And you're like, this is worth it. And you're like, yo, I always joke that Doek is always 2 weeks. I'm always 2 weeks away from like closing Doek because I'm like, yo, this is a lot of work. And then that email comes and you're like, let's put out another edition.
Right?
Let's put out another edition.
Exactly. Every time you try to get out, they
Exactly. And I think you guys at MoAD who are working in a cultural institution, you would know this, and I commend you for just pushing on and carrying on, because sometimes it feels unrewarded. You have questions, existential questions about whether what you're doing has value, until some random kid walks into a thing and then, walks in, it's like, oh, I want to be an archaeologist because my mom took me to this museum and I saw these masks and I was like, this would be cool. I think art is always about that one extra person. It's not about the 99, it's about that one extra person to get them on board. And that's always amazing and fulfilling to see. So the weather forecast is encouraging, and I'm still here in Namibia, fam, like doing the work. The mosquitoes are about to get me in October. It's hot already. It was just fucking cold in June and July. Oh, it was so cold, but the work is being done, and writing is such an optimistic time for writers in Namibia. That is something that's amazing to be a part of.
That's great. Congratulations to you, everyone.
Yeah.
That's really, really wonderful. So we have a couple of questions from Pamela and from Ricardo, and I'm going to just invite you to unmute yourselves and ask Rémy directly.
Yeah.
So I'm always curious to know what you're working on now, what you will publish next.
The dreaded question.
Ooh, man, like again, maybe because I'm here, that question isn't always so intimidating. But what am I working on now? So this isn't something that's part of the public record or my public persona, if you want to call it that. But in the evenings, I run like the only salsa club in the country. We dance in the evenings. That's what I do. So that's what if you're asking about now, that's what I'm going to be doing tomorrow evening. And then I just started, and I was lucky enough to start like a gym. And that's what I'm going to be doing in the morning tomorrow. Am I writing? Not actively, in the sense like I have a draft that's going on, but I've got ideas swirling around in my head, in my psyche, that I pen down every so often. And I can acknowledge that I'm not in the shape to work on a long narrative at the moment. It requires a particular kind of discipline, a particular kind of focus that I can admit I don't have and has been had to cultivate this year with the festival, with the magazine, with everything that I'm busy going on, or that I have going on happening. But it's building to that critical point where you're like, dude, are you gonna do this or you're not gonna do this? And often when I reach that point with a lot of projects, it's like, okay, this is gonna happen. I need to move 3 hours out of the day to work on this project. It's coming along. I can't tell you what it is right now because it still hasn't yet taken shape. I know I can feel it just there in the ether. I've seen some sentences, I've seen some scenes, some description, but I'll only know what it is once either I'm in the middle of it or towards the end. A memoir, I don't think I'm interesting enough for a memoir. A short story, man, I have a lot of short stories that I would like to write. A novel definitely takes a lot more discipline and a more concerted effort of time to do it, so I'd like to get back into it. And so I'll just say other, as Pamela asked. I will say other.
Oh, that's funny. So that kind of connects to Ricardo's query too. Did you want to unmute? Okay. He's asking if you've considered ever writing poetry.
Oh, so, like every teenager that grew up in the early 90s and the early 30s, we might have a book of very bad poetry that needs to be burned. Or we might have been idiots and saved these things into a digital format that we're too scared to delete. But I try not to identify as a poet because that would be a defamation of my character. So I do write poetry, but it is not my main form of creative outlet. It's an idea really has to be intense, and I have to really it has to appear to me like this can only be written and expressed in this way. With that said, I have an intense enjoyment of poetry when it is very, very well written, like Nia McAllister's amazing work. I absolutely do love poetry that's been well written, that is well crafted. There's this Jamaican poet whose work I can't get over, Aishan Hutchinson. Oh man, he's got this amazing collection called House of Lords and Commons, which is just, oh, it blew my mind, you know. And then there's wait, if I can reach for it, can I see it over here? What's her name? There are more beautiful things in the world than Beyonce or something.
Oh yeah, Morgan.
Morgan Parker, who I met in Cape Town and who still owes me a drink, by the way. Just putting it out there. Poets are cheap. Poets be cheapin'. Poets be cheapin'. And what's his name? Nif Muhammad. Nif, American poet. Nif, his work, again, when I encountered it, I was like, I didn't know you could write this kind of poetry. And so for me, I was just like, this is amazing, like absolutely amazing. So yes, I do write poetry, but it is not my main thing. But the good news is that I recently got the good news that a poem that I submitted has been accepted in 14 Heels, which is one of the journals that I really love reading. So it's gonna come out there. But I'm also I'm a little bit shy about saying that I have had some poetry published, because it's not an aspect of my being that I'm 100% yet comfortable. So there is work out there, and there might be links on my website, but it's not stuff I'm like, hey, new poem. Because, you know, Faith, I'm not gonna lie to you, you know, like as soon as you say you're a poet, like you just get put in a particular kind of bracket. And, you know, I want to be in the bracket of people who shower, you know, like,
Poets money. You don't want that poetry money.
Unless it's that, what's that crazy thing that Derek Walcott, some big UK prize, it's the case. Anyway, but poets get such a bad rep. And I've seen in the industry how when you are identifying as a poet, opportunities just seem to dry up a little bit. It's something that's prejudicial in the local literary industry. Some that desperately needs to be addressed, because poets are doing amazing work in literature. They're the ones who take us from the known to the unknown. And fiction writers like me are like lazy. We just show up when all the hard work has been done and we put in nice prose sentences. So yeah, I do write in poetry, but it is a form that I am yet to be 100% comfortable with. I'm still feeling my way through it. But it is such, when poetry is done beautifully. Oh man, there was there was a conversation that you had, MoAD had with Rankin.
Oh, Claudia Rankin. Oh.
Yeah, and man, I stayed up late. I stayed up late to just be part of this. And Sarah Ladipo was generous enough to allow me to ask a question, and then my internet cut because, you know, Namibia. But the work that I think she was talking about citizen. And that for me at the time, I was really wondering what it meant to be a citizen of any one place or to belong. And her work and her insights were amazing. They were just amazing. So I love poets. I love poetry. I would love to create more in that field. It's a craft that I'm still working on. Nia must share her tips.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Nia, do you want to take us home?
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for such a lively and wonderful discussion. Congratulations again, Rémy. So well deserved. Congratulations again to the shortlist. We are in such great company with all the writers that we've read through African Book Club, and I'm excited to keep reading. This series continues monthly, and so next month we'll be reading the book If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga, and we'll be meeting on Sunday, October 23rd from 5 to 6 p.m., 5 to 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. So please join us. We'll drop the link to that in the chat. So please read the book ahead of time. Come join us for a conversation. And we have many more books lined up. So please visit our website, moadsf.org, to take a look. And this is one of many programs that we do at the museum. So if you're interested, please come and support the work we're doing. If you're local to the Bay Area, come visit the museum. But if not, we're still continuing a virtual presence. There's many ways to engage and stay connected to the work that we're doing. Thank you again, Faith, for hosting this wonderful series, for bringing this to MoAD. It's created such a wonderful community here. Thank you, Cedric, for supporting this literary award and making this event possible. And thank you all for being our wonderful attentive audience and our active participants in African Book Club. We so appreciate it. So if you have a few moments after this, please do fill out our program survey. It does help us know what more programming to do, how to best support our communities, and we always love hearing from you. So thank you all again, and please take care and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you may be. Thank you.
Thank you.